And we're live. Pau, welcome to the Unicorn CTO podcast. I'm really happy to have you.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
I have a million questions to ask you, but one that's really burning me, and you're not the first guest that I'm asking that question, but one of the key questions I always get from engineers in every company I try to implement engineering management good practices is, we don't need managers, or the fact that managers are associated with HR, vacation, and
Yeah, yeah,
yearly review and bonus. So, what's your view on that? And actually, do engineering teams need managers?
yeah. It's a recurrent topic. I know where it comes from. There's a spectrum, of course. There's limits to it, and I can talk about the no managers as part of the spectrum empirically because I've been there. I've experienced that. A lot of people who says that have never really been there. When I got into Typeform, that was years later. I was already experienced back then. I got a team of 60 developers, no managers, and just me as a CTO. That was my landing situation, right? It was a mess. And not because of my opinion. They were all very uncomfortable, very unhappy in complaining a lot about a lot of things. And if you would threat, okay, what are you complaining about? What's the problem? Number one issue was nobody knows that I'm working on this. Very often I said, okay, why are you working on this? Because I decided so. Fine, but then how do you expect people to know that you are working on this? Number two pain was I don't get impact assessment, I don't get attribution, I don't get merit of what I'm doing. I have no visibility. So where is my career gonna go? And then number three is I'm working on this because I want to. I need this from this other team, but they're also working on something that they want to. They don't want to work on my thing, so I'm blocked, right? So I cannot collaborate and isolate. That was the status of the situation on a team that was also very wary about having managers. They didn't like the idea. So I remember my first task at Typeform was 2-3 months of cleaning up the definition of management. Like, what is a manager? We thought there was a lot of misconceptions about what a manager is. We had to boil it down to the bare essence. Like, a manager is somebody that gets shit done at the same time that it gets a happy team. That's it. Getting one without the other, that's not good work. Getting shit done, if you don't have a happy team, that's not a good manager. Having a happy team without getting shit done is also not a good manager. Where the two go in conflict, that's where a manager is. That's first straight. And we slowly build up a new managerial layer. I also think that a lot of people that says this comes from, I think the industry has overdone this role. Definitely. I think the 1-to-6 ratio, the two bids a team, these kinds of things have been very imposed by sometimes HR, sometimes what the very same engineering industry thought was reasonable, and it was not. I think we have been in a lot of years in management philosophy that has been very paternalistic, very loaded of middle managers, very niche, like then you would have a lot of things, very intense on one-ons, on the well-being of the team, not so much on the responsibility of the individual, and the fact that
Mm,
if you have
mm.
a lot of senior people below you, you can have 10 reports, no problem. You cannot.
That's actually one of my questions, but I like your analogy of being too much focused on the happiness of the team, like an internal chief happiness officer. But what's the right number? Because you landed at Typeform with 60 developers reporting to you. I know some people are saying the right number of direct reports is 6 to 8. You can go up to 15 if you have technical leads. Do you have a view on that?
Yes. I mean, I think that those numbers are correct. But when you get that, very rarely people go over 6. Like, what you say is the textbook answer, but in reality, you have this unspoken rule that 6-to-1 is the hard limit. And more than that, you need a sub manager. Also, a lot of people need to be able to crawl up the hierarchy by having more managers below them, like plays into this factor. I don't think it's a clean number. In my experience, you can manage 10 senior autonomous people. And I think where managers, we got it wrong for a lot of years. And I think now we kind of undoing that. It's as if managers were responsible of making people happy, making people motivated. And I don't think you can push happiness into somebody. You cannot push motivation into somebody. You can remove the blockers to happiness. You can remove the blockers to motivation. But at the end of the day, is the very same person that has a drive or not towards those things. And when you switch responsibilities in that regard, that's when you can start managing much more people, because you don't need to be on top of them, baby spooning them. They will come to you when they need
Mm.
something, right? And I think a lot of the managerial, being very micro-controlling, these kinds of things, they come from this philosophy of management that has been the standard for many years than what we are doing now.
And I'm curious to know your view about the way you actually identify which developer should become a manager, because in a lot of countries, especially in old Europe, management is still viewed in a lot of companies as a promotion. Like if you want to have more responsibilities, if you want to
Yeah,
make more money,
yeah.
you become a manager. And now I've seen a lot of companies adopting the Silicon Valley way of separating managerial track with expertise. But at the same time, I see now developers who want the staff engineer salary, but without any interaction with other humans. Like, just let me code on my side. I'm old, so give me a big salary.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's your experience with that?
My experience with that is that the first thing you need to implement is what they say, the Y career path. So you need to implement the technical career path before you can do this well. Because if you don't have a same path there, as you say, people see managerial as the only promotion path, and that just contaminates the conversation so much that it's just not truthful on both sides. It's very hard to evaluate somebody on the merits of being a manager when that's the only possibility. You need to know the possibility. So I would implement that first. Now, and that's actually easier to implement than the managerial part. Then if people get promoted there and how, that's a completely different discussion, right? Once you have both, I do think that what makes a good manager also depends a lot on the managerial step that we are. It's not the same thing to be a first-time manager managing ICs than to be a manager of managers. And it's not the same thing to be a manager of managers than to own a business unit or to have a 6 months budget responsibility, much less to be a C-level. These are almost, and that's part of the challenge of the job, these are different jobs, require different skills. And it's perfectly fine to be an excellent team lead who's never going to be a director. That's okay. And very often people think that when you have this why, or you have to decide if you go to the technical track or the managerial role, you kind of commit to one of the branches. And I think that's a huge mistake. But what people doesn't understand is there's so much skill overlap between these two branches that you can actually hop from one to the other horizontally and still accumulate salary raises. Because having a staff engineer who previously was managing 20 people, that's a very good hire. That somebody should have very good salary. Or having a staff engineer that's now going to pick 5 developers and manage them through something, that's much better than somebody that is still a staff engineer but cannot do that. Right?
But that's providing the manager remain technical and they kept actually honing their technical
That's a
skills,
must.
which may be difficult when you have all those meetings and dashboards and KPIs and OKRs and all these managerial
Let's
responsibilities,
go
right?
there. How to keep managers technical? That's a very big topic. But before that, you ask, what do you look into a manager?
Yes,
At
yes,
the
I do.
at the at the first level, like when you're getting somebody to the first managerial role, my opinion is that the best performer at that level, they are already leading behind the scenes to a certain extent. They already have the respect of the developers. They are these informal leaders, and very often they don't want to become managers. You have to convince them. And it's very, very tricky because they may be right. They may not want to be managers. They may not be managers. You have to spot these people that don't want the power, but would actually use it rightly if they have it, versus the people that don't want the power because they would probably not doing well. If I see somebody that wants that too much, for me, that becomes a red flag, especially at these levels.
Mm.
Then when you go up and you are talking about, okay, becoming manager of managers, then you look for more particular hard skills, mostly system thinking. Is this somebody that can look at the big picture? Is this a good translator with other departments? Is this person going to be able to explain hard stuff to people who knows nothing about it? And then probably managing up, if you go to the C-level, becomes the top skill.
And I'd love to get into systems thinking, but let's take the questions in order. So how do you remain technical when you're a manager?
I think you have to remain technical when you're a manager up to the highest level. I think that's a must. The moment that becomes not true, I think organizations start to suffer very, very much. I've been in organizations where we had 2,000 developers
Mhm.
and VPs were required to be able to read and review a pull request. And I think that's the level of technical. I think we are all builders when we get on this profession. We all like to build. So you need to be hands-on. You need to throw some code, probably on your free time, probably outside of the company and within the company, not on the product itself. I think it becomes an anti-pattern where the actual delivery is spending on the CTO reviewing a pull request or even implementing
Yes,
a
I've
user
seen
story.
that. I've seen that.
It happens. I mean, you need to be hands-on, but get yourself out of the way at the same time, which very often it means that you as a senior leader spend time on prototypes, ideas, code that supports research, data mining, these kinds of things. And this is where you find your venues to, stay sharp more than the product itself. You need to be able to get into a dashboard with your team and you need to be able to unblock them and understand what they are doing. You don't need to be a better developer than they are. If you are a better developer than they are, you probably did something wrong hiring. And if you start developing next to them, you're going to slow them down. If you are the CTO and you don't slow down your team by developing next to them, you didn't hire well. You need to read a lot and you need to share a lot of whiteboards with the technical people that you have. And on those whiteboards, you are not going to be better developers than they are. You come from another place. You bring another kind of value, but you got to be there. You got to understand the problems.
And going back to systems thinking that you mentioned, which is a very important critical skill, which I even can say it's between a skill and a mindset. So
Yes.
how do you develop that? So how did you get into systems thinking? Were you able to share that with your team?
Wow, I don't know if I've ever been able to teach systems thinking. I think it's something that you come with. I think there are some books like Thinking in Systems and these kinds that have the main tenet and the main theory. I always have my managers read The Goal, which is a book from the 90s about theory of
Yes.
constraints. I just think that one of the things that somehow it's not said in the industry is that everything, DevOps, the Phoenix projects,
Yeah,
Kanban,
it's
Scrum,
based on the
it's
goal.
all theory of constraints.
Yeah.
And that's a 200 pages book. Like
Yeah.
start there, get the science right. And then everything else falls into place as common sense. And you will be able to evaluate the receipts and say, okay, that makes sense, but not for us. Or we tried that and this is why it's not working. I think part of the cargo code that we got, just the liturgies everywhere, but not the underlying principles, it's because people hasn't read theory of constraints. That said, by systems thinking, we can mean several things. One is understanding the principles of how things flow and feedback loops. And at the end of the day, when you are managing a 200 people organization, that's your machine. If you want to optimize by overall productivity, not individual productivity, you need to understand that machine in terms of who needs whose permission to move, how is work flowing, what are my feedback loops, what if I understaff this, what happens down the chain, these kinds of things. So that helps a lot. There's another one that is you don't understand everything that's going on. You don't understand all the technology that's in the product. It's impossible. You have delegated that to people that are smarter than you. So very often you need to think from first principles when they come to you with a problem. You need to break down the problem into fundamental parts to be able to build up again with a solution. And I think that's what you get good at when you become a manager and you are not the one throwing in the code anymore.
All right. So let me add some complexity here. Let's add AI
No, well,
in the mix, especially now that you're an entrepreneur in AI. So I'm really curious to understand how everything you just shared applies with agentic AI and Code Copilot in the mix, and the fact that our profession has changed so much in the past 20, actually more than in the
yes.
last 10, 15 years. So how a human manager who's managing humans can now transition into a manager slash orchestrator of humans and AI agents?
Exactly. I think that there's two things going on. I would say there are three things going on. I think we got engineering management relatively right in the last 10 years. Like when I went to that master that I was telling you, even the professors were saying, we don't know what we are doing. This is artisanal, and I think over the course of the next 16 years, we started getting DevOps right. We started getting delivery right, people management right. I think we figured it out. I think Before AI, before 25 months ago, I would very confidently say that in engineering manager, 90% of the problems that somebody's going to find, they have a very well-known playbook now. It's work. It's not easy, but a lot of people have solved this before. I can give you good advice. I think AI kind of resets that. I think we go back to the drawing board. A lot of those playbooks are not valid anymore. I do think that the underlying principles remain true, and I would say they are truer than ever. I think it's still theory of constraints below. So it's still flows and throughput and lead time and cycle time and these kinds of things. So if you need to hang on to something on the age of AI as an engineering manager, I would say hang on to the Dora metrics. If people is not familiar to them, these are derived from a book called Accelerate. I look over there because my books are here. The book called Accelerate essentially defines or measures software engineering as a black box that has 4 metrics, right? A change frequency, delivery time, lead time, a time to resolution, and blah, blah, blah. I think that's still true. What you need to do in those blocks to maximize that has changed. One of the ways that it has changed is that every developer is now a manager, which is extremely painful. They are not managing people. They are not managing people who need one-on-ones and vacations. They are managing agents. And agents they are not humans, but they have a certain kind of intelligence, and they have some of the same drawbacks that intelligence has. They need context. They make mistakes. They need supervision. They need input, right? And that's now they are managing this kind of like super intelligence minions, however you want to call it. No. And a lot of the skills they'll need is the same skills that engineering managers needed when they stopped with writing code and just orchestrating a team of 6 people that was writing code faster than they could read it. No. So they need to see how do I build my mechanisms to trust the output of my team without checking every item myself, because I cannot anymore. What we are personally finding out, and I think we are all learning here, is that you had this definition phase, implementation phase, and verification phase. And generally companies would do a lot of definition, maybe too much, and especially delegating that to product management, these kind of things. Then you would do implementation, and you would probably implement never everything that was specified. You would just drop at 60, 70, 80% of what was specified. And then verification was the big missing one. No, you would have companies that they would test in production. The user was the testing, and then you would have other companies that would try to do quality assurance and monitoring and these kind of things. But that was the biggest drop. I think with AI, the implementation phase is the one that you delegate to a very particular kind of intelligence that has its own drawbacks, and you need to learn how to delegate to that intelligence. A specification and verification is where most of the work happens now. And I would even say verification is way above a specification. I don't think AI needs you to specify things more. It does, but you don't need to specify it all. It's good at iterating. The problem with AI is that you need very good self-verifying software. You need to evaluate what the AI did without having to read all that code, because it's not possible anymore. It just generates code at a rate that you will not be able to read it. You will not be able to understand it. You need other systems to know that it's correct, that it's doing what it needs to do. And I think here is where we are all lost. I don't think the traditional QA based on test plans and test cases, or even monitoring production, shadow rolling out, features flag, this kind of thing. I don't think this is enough. So we need new playbooks.
And what's your stack? So because I'm sure you're trying a lot of those new AI yourself. So what is the stack that you're currently using?
We have kind of an internal competition on who use the winning stack, because we find out that's the way to fuel exploration. I think we are in a moment where you marry stack and you may be right that week, but you are wrong 2 weeks down the line. It's just they just evolve so quickly. That said, to give you concrete answers, we use mainly Cursor. We don't use the Cursor AI beyond auto-completion. We use Claude. I was actually pushing the team for using Codex, because for a month, Codex was working for me way better than Claude. The team was kind of reticent, and this week I have actually proved them right. I have dropped Codex myself, and I'm back to Claude because it's way better. But I gotta say, I may win next week. Even these providers, depending on the pricing tier that you are, or the hour of the day that you are developing, it degrade. So I don't think you need to consider which agent are you using. I think you need to build your system around being able to switch agents from one week to the other.
And does the same apply to the models that you're using for anything for your product? So, or did you went for a specific model that you fine tune and that you're
No.
updating internally?
So what we do is we start every functionality with
And
meaning.
maybe you can explain what anything does, so listeners
Yes,
can actually
we'll
understand
start
a bit
there. Yeah.
more.
So what we are doing at anything is a virtual assistant with AI. There's a lot of companies that are doing virtual assistant with AI. We have a different thesis, which is that they are trying to get rid of the human. We don't. We think that the human in the loop is going to make the entire difference. That AI will do a lot of things, but never all of them, and never good enough. So the fact that there is a human for the last mile of work is going to make all the difference for people who's really busy. What we are shipping as a product right now, we call this perfect blend of AI and human, where you have an AI on WhatsApp, an email that you can forward an email thread to, add to a thread to schedule a meeting, or you can WhatsApp to and ask for something like, okay, tell me if I have conflicts next week, or make sure I never have a meeting on Wednesday morning because I do yoga. These kind of things you would tell to your assistant. Sorry. And when the AI knows I cannot do this, instead of hallucinating, what it does is it delegates to the human, and it also gives this human all the necessary context from you that it needs to know for that particular task. So you don't get those delegation frictions that very often we hear, that if I have to explain this, it's so much time to explain it that it's just faster for me to do it myself. We find out that AI is actually very good at summarizing and transporting context more than it is at actually doing. So anything is that. It's a kind of a virtual assistant slash concierge. You can go to anything.so and you can sign up there, and you'll be able to try it. All the automations are free for now. So if you just want to try what the AI can do, you can just play with it. The first task, when you involve a human, that's also free. If you want more than that, then we have a paid plan. Then back to your question about model, empirically, we have kind of learned to start all the functionalities with 4.0 meaning. For us, it hits this right spot of it's quick enough and smart enough that it tells us the ballpark of is the functionality we're trying to build is doable. In our experience, if we go to much more expensive models, what they call the thinking models, they are terrible. They are terrible at doing things. They are supposed to think more, and we don't see that at all. Now, when we have implemented the functionality and we have developed the test harness about, okay, that's the functionality, this is the 50 things it should do, and now we can reliably test it. Then we do a matrix of parameters, which includes trying all the models. Very often Gemini 2.5 is the one that also competes with 4.0 Mini. Is the one that if 4.0 Mini died tomorrow and I had to pick another default model, I would definitely go to the Gemini 2.5. But I do think you need to do that very, very empirically. Very, very empirically. And also these models, they change overnight without telling you. So you need to do this from
Yeah.
time to time, because you're using the same string and it's not the same model anymore.
Got it. Very clear. So if you were to go back to leading a large engineering team with all this new AI stack and AI tools that are available, would you go through hypergrowth and hiring a lot of developers like Typeform did and other companies where you work did? Or would you try to just hire like the most senior people you can find, equip them with the right AI tools, and maybe do exactly the same or more with twice as less people?
I'm going to give you two answers. I think the reasonable answer from a managerial perspective is you can do much more with more senior developers AI equipped than just throwing heads at the problem. That's true. And the uncomfortable truth of management, in my experience, is that it doesn't matter how well you lead people and how well you manage people and your managers manage people. The more people you have, productivity degrades and happiness degrades. There is a certain degradation by the number of heads that is unavoidable. And you can palliate that with a better manager, and you can stretch that a lot with better management, but to a certain extent. I think a 100 people team will never kick ass per capita as a 10 people team, ever. You know, just the curation of the talent that you can do, the selection, and how 10 people can coordinate among themselves is never going to happen in a 100 people team, which at the same time, they're going to work per capita as a 1,000 people team will never work to. And that's the only reason why startups work. because they are smaller in a world of big people and they can be faster, right? So definitely, I would try to push the headcount down. The other answer I have for you is, in my experience in scale-ups, the headcount, it does not come from an assessment of the work, ever. The headcount very often comes from an arm race with the competitors in the market. So you have other people, you are hyper growth, you are VC backed. If you are VC backed, very often you are in a strategy where you are trying to win a market entirely. You're just not okay with being another of the healthy companies out there. You want to absolutely win that market. And there's very often 2 or 3 other companies that are trying to do the very same thing, you know? And hyper growth headcount comes from, I'm not going to have less people than they do just in case. Okay. Not so much for the assessment of, I have all this work to do. So I have this productivity per person. So I need this many persons. It doesn't come from that.
And what are you doing now in your startup and small team that is preparing the team for the future scale? So, because I imagine that getting into Typeform as a CTO with already 60 developers waiting for you is different than actually building the building block by block. So what are you doing now that is laying the foundation for the future growth?
Nothing. I think I don't have to. Actually, one of my challenges to go from an executive career down to 0 to 1, as they say, a pre-product market fit, is that I know too much. And this is not me. I think part of being doing a startup and doing the 0 to 1, it requires a naive component. I think there was an investor in Spain who said a sentence that stick to me, which I'm translating literally from Spain, but essentially saying something like, all entrepreneurship comes from an incorrect evaluation of the risks. If you correctly evaluate the risks, you don't start this company, you know? And coming from seniority and expertise to that world, very often, if you try to apply the knowledge, if you try to get ahead and prepare for what you know is coming, you are doing it wrong. We are a startup. We are default that we don't have product market fit yet. We gotta get the thing we want to do this week right, and everything, every preparation that gets energy away from the team out of what we this week we want to get right, it's a waste of time. And I've wasted that time. I've been adding complexity to my team because we will need this and we will need that. And the truth is, you will only not need those things if you are alive in a year from now, and that's far from given. So no, I'm trying very hard to not prepare at all for scale at this moment.
And if you were to advise CTOs and engineering leaders that are actually going through scale,
Yes.
startup funding is lower than the previous years, but we still have a lot of companies that are scaling their operations and their engineering teams. So what are like your top advices for CTOs and engineering leaders?
For hypergrowth specifically, or for scaling in general?
For scaling in general, and if you have like specifics for hypergrowth, then I'll take them as well.
Yeah, for me, hypergrowth is defined by chaos. Hypergrowth is chaos. There is no better name for it. And it needs specific playbooks. Very importantly, you must hire for chaos. You must hire people and be very upfront that you are joining a shit show, because hypergrowth is a shit show. People spend 2 weeks interviewing somebody, give them an offer, they join 3 weeks from now, and in that time, the team they were supposed to go doesn't exist anymore. You know, so you need to prepare people for hypergrowth. In regular scaling up, more or less aggressively, but where you can plan, which for me separates from hypergrowth. I think the common sense rule is hire for what you're going to need in 18 months. So you need to know where you're going to be in terms of organizational design, headcount size, functions you're going to need, skills you're going to need in New York 18 months from now, because it takes that to properly hire, plan, hire, and ramp up those people. If you don't do that, you will always be playing catch up. That's definitely one. The other one that for me I observed in 3 scale-ups I was in is that you need to periodically re-onboard people, because when you are growing fast enough, when people join 9 months ago, they joined a different company and they joined for different reasons. And maybe some of the reasons they are not valid anymore. And you see this very, very often in scale-ups where you have, I don't know, 200 people, like I had at Typeform at the end or at Aurea. And you really see the generations of people, and you see how they group together. They hang out almost by month of joining the company. And that's not rare, because they join under a particular company of a different headcount, with particular leaders and different discourse, very different from the people that joined 6 months later. That was a different company with a different discourse, different perks. And they have been migrated to the new company as the fact of growing very quickly, and more often than you unwillingly. If they get honest to you, they would have preferred the company to have stayed at that headcount they joined, because that is what they sign up for. So you have to be very open with that. You need to be very sensitive to that. You need to re-onboard people, kind of renewing the vowels with the company that you are today, which is not the one they joined. And also be okay that some people will not renew the vowels, and that's perfectly fine. And that's attrition. It's always costly, but it's better to part ways in a good way with somebody that enjoys 100 people company, and you are a 500 people company now, and that has that person happy inside, frictioning with all those processes, whatever, which is just to complain about. Yeah, there might be more. I don't know, but I think scaling up is also very, very specific to each industry and to this company. For me, I think scaling up is a people's problem, mostly. I think the processes aspect of it, that's easy peasy. That's easy to fix. People issues are where scaling up becomes challenging.
That's very clear. I have a last question for you. Actually, two last questions.
All right.
The first one is that you're based in Barcelona.
Yes.
And apart from being a great city to hang out, it's also becoming a renowned tech hub in Europe. So how is it to build a startup out of Barcelona and a tech hub? And would you recommend more European companies to establish tech hubs in Barcelona?
Yeah, I definitely would. I'm not gonna I don't wanna go into the head to head of you should go to Barcelona instead of Berlin, or instead of Paris, or instead of London. I think London is on its own league, just because of access to capital. And then there is the rest of the cities in Europe. They are very strong contenders, and you should pick one or the other because of the industry you want to start the company in. Some are stronger in one or the other. For instance, Paris is very strong on AI. If you want to do fundamental AI like models, right, you probably should go there, and you shouldn't care about the size of the ecosystem outside of that, and also your personal culture. Because beyond working, you're gonna be living, so you gotta be able to make yourself a happy life there. I know a lot of people that have gone to Berlin. It's a fantastic city, but they never could make roots. And eventually they end up leaving. That said, Barcelona has changed a lot. When I joined Cytel, 2013, I think, or even maybe 11, something like that. It's not so much long ago. I joined Cytel because it was an electronic voting company like Hard Tech that was international and headquartered in Barcelona. And I think it was the only one. Or maybe there was Grupalia, like 2 or 3 more on Barcelona. Everything else was software factories, were centers, like international startups that would open a development center in Barcelona. And there were like very big, very well-paying ones like King and very video games and kind of stuff, which helped us build the industry, because from those places, there was a lot of expertise and good developers out. I think in 10 years that has changed completely. There's a lot of companies headquartered here. And the other thing that has helped us is that the talent market is now international. I have, actually Typeform I've always lived in Barcelona, but I've never worked in Barcelona. All my startups after Typeform, they were international. I was working fully remotely for a company in Texas, for a company in California. Typhoon was for me the first time in 7 years that I would go to an office in Barcelona. And I think that's okay, and that's great. It allows a lot of people to worry less about the local ecosystem and more about how am I going to be a happy person, where I'm going to live, because then I can work wherever I want.
Cool. That's very clear. So the last question for you is, I'm actually asking for a recommendation. You mentioned the goal. It's actually one of my favorite business books, which is, by the way, a novel. Do you have any other book recommendations that you would share with CTOs and engineering leaders?
That depends on on the problem they are trying to fix. I would say, don't read any other book until you have done all the theory of constraint series, which starts with the goal and then it continues with the Phoenix project and the DevOps project, because those things are also novels, by the way, which I'm not a fan of. I like my things to the point, so I don't really need characters in my theory of constraints. But it's true that if you got those 3 books right, the Phoenix Project, DevOps, after the theory of constraints, and you understand the underlying principles, you have a very good foundations for system thinking. You have a strong point for being managers. If you are struggling with people issues, there is of course radical candor, which is a must-have. There is the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is a must-have. Everybody recommends those. Plus one to that, you know. On top of that, I would add the $1 Billion Coach, which is a book about a coach of some executive in Silicon Valley. He was a sports coach before being an executive coach. And I do think that book, it's harder to summarize. Like, I cannot give you the ABC of that book, but it gives you a very good feeling about what being a leader really is and the exercise of ethics that it is at the end of the day. So I would throw that into the mix.
Cool. That's a lot of books to read. Pau,
Yeah,
I'm really happy about our conversation. I learned a lot today. Thank you very much for your time.
I'm happy for the people that's listening to this to reach out if they have more questions or try anything. Sign up on the webpage. It's open right now.
Cool. Thank you very much, Pau. It was a pleasure, and we wish you a lot of success for anything.
Thank you, Daniel. Take care.